You can go ahead and have a seat when you're ready. I'll put this right here. We are on the second week of our Campfire Stories series. And this week we're spending 1 week on Isaac, the son of Abraham. And Isaac is very interesting because not much is written about him. And most of what is written about him is our story for today. It is the longest courting story, the beginning of a love story that we have about one person named, about two people named in the scriptures. 67 verses. You will not hear all of that. But basically what had happened was Abraham and Sarah got really, really old. And Sarah died. And Abraham and Isaac, the only son of Abraham and Sarah, had to deal with that grief. You know, Abraham and Sarah were the people that God called and said, leave your homeland and go to the land where I will show you. And they went, which means that at Sarah's death, they didn't have tons of family around them, you know, because they had left their homeland. And so, you know, losing a mother for Isaac, and no matter how long a life our moms live, it's not an easy thing to deal with. And Abraham and Isaac were kind of left with this loneliness. It comes from losing a spouse or from losing a mom. So in his grief, Abraham made a decision. Abraham knew that the time had come for him to find Isaac a wife. Abraham believed that love and starting a family of his own would help Isaac move on appropriately from the loss of his own mother. But he had to pick someone special for Isaac, someone really amazing. Arranged marriages is just how things happened back then. This would be no exception. But who should Abraham pick for his son? He'd have to be very careful, he thought. This is a very important decision. The covenant is relying on it. The land where Abraham and his family were living now was a land called Canaan, but Abraham wanted to make sure that Isaac's wife came from their homeland back in Haran. He knew that the covenant that God made with him and Sarah, to always be in relationship with them, to love them, to be faithful to them, the same covenant that promised Abraham as many descendants as sand on the seashore and stars in the sky. This marriage that Isaac will have, everything's riding on it. So he has to find the right woman, a kind and generous woman, reflecting the same kind of kindness and generosity that God had showed Abraham and Sarah. Abraham had to be picky. So in the longest courting story of the patriarchs and matriarchs in Genesis, Abraham sends a servant of his back to Nahor, back to Haran, to find a wife for Isaac. We're not going to listen to all 67 verses, but we are going to listen to excerpts of about 22 of those. Here's the story from the book.
This is Genesis 24, 34 through 38, 42 through 49, and 58 through 67. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy. He has given him flocks, herds, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and he has given him all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's home, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you will only make successful the way I am going, I am standing here by the spring. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman who the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had even finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said, please give me a drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank while she watered the camels. Then I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Micah bore to him. So I put a ring on her nose and bracelets on her arms, and then I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord. And blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, so that I can turn either to my right hand or to my left. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? She said, I will. So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes. And then Rebekah and her maids rose up, mounted the camels, and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had come from the land of Beer-lahai and settled in Negev. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the fields, and looking up, he saw camels coming. And Rebekah looked up when she saw Isaac, and she slipped quickly from the camel and said to the servant, who is that man over there walking in the fields to meet us? The servant said, it's my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. And then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted from his mother's death.
It's only a third of the story. It's a long story. It's a long, long love story. Okay, so maybe it doesn't sound as romantic as nowadays love stories, right? The servant is tired and needs water. He's traveled to a different land to go find this wife for Isaac. And a very kind and generous woman gives him a drink and then goes above and beyond and gives water to his camels as well. And something about that moment, God just told the servant. I mean, the servant just knew this is the girl. This is the one. So he gives her 2 gold bracelets and a nose ring. Betrothal body jewelry. I'm into it. That's great. And then something amazing happens. Rebekah does something gutsy and risky, just like Abraham and Sarah did decades before. When they say, are you willing to leave your homeland and go? She says yes. She just says yes. Gets on some camels and goes. And she gets to gets to Canaan and sees Isaac, right? We have this wonderful scene of her putting her veil down, and then they enter into the mother's tent. And I remember being a little girl asking my mom, what does that mean? What does it mean that Isaac and Rebekah entered Sarah's tent? And my mother, in her wisdom, responded, well, it means that they got married and they were with each other as husband and wife. And I said, oh, so that means that Isaac won't miss his mom so much? And she said, yeah, honey, I think so. This story might not register on the level of Romeo and Juliet for us, but this story is a wonderful love story. And it points out that love, even in the days of arranged marriages, even thousands and thousands of years ago, is still something that matters to us as people and matters to God. It's a wonderful love story about a beloved child finding his beloved. We like love stories. We like love stories for a lot of reasons. The ups and downs of emotions, that passion, that whole beginning part that's filled with blind romance and new experiences. The parts years later where you really, really know each other. And surprisingly, against all odds, you still want to stick around. How one partner can name the wrinkles on the other's face by which children they were dealing with at the time. The songs that we sing for love, the poems we write, the entire book, the Song of Solomon found in the Bible, right? It's an entire book about love and romance and sex and marriage and youthful courting and aging together and staying together. And if you have found this kind of love at least once in your life, you know that you are luckier than most. And if you have found it more than once, how very, very blessed you have been. Because with love, we risk everything. It requires vulnerability. It requires deep vulnerability. There's a Rob Bell book where he has a great example of the vulnerability of love. He talks about being at a school dance in 7th grade in junior high, which I mean is just an awkward time of life in general, right? Let alone to have a crush on someone. And so at the school dance, they were in the gymnasium, and all of the girls were on one side, and all of the boys were on the other side. And so, he's over hanging out with his friends, and there's this girl he wanted to ask to dance, but he couldn't just go up in some kind of safe fashion. He had to, by himself, walk across the entire length of the gym, right? Get all the way to this young girl and ask her to dance. You know what she says? No. So then he has to turn all the way around and walk all the way back. Love requires vulnerability and taking a risk and the chance that someone might say no. Love is risky. We take a risk. We're vulnerable every time we put ourselves out there for love. So when we fall in love and that love isn't returned, or if we lose our partner to death or to divorce, we knew those risks were possible. We were vulnerable to that, but love was worth it. Like the stories around campfires, our love stories are ones we share. How often, as a child, did you ask your parents, Mom, Dad, how did you meet? We like to hear these stories. We like to share these stories because the depth and the breadth of love is expansive. But yes, it requires vulnerability. The kind that both Rebekah and Isaac clearly had in this story. It requires trust and taking a leap of faith. Love is risky, children of God. And the risk of love is a reflection of the larger divine risk. Again, the risk of love is a reflection of the larger divine risk. God takes a chance on loving us, risking everything. I mean, think about it. How easy and how quickly we say, of course God loves us. But if God really loves us, then that means that there is a vulnerability and a risk on God's part. I mean, who's ever heard of a love that isn't vulnerable or risky? If it's certain to be reciprocated, or if it's coercive, then it's not really love. We tell the stories of love in our book of faith, in our Bible, yes, because love between humans is amazing and wonderful and unmatched, but also because the only thing that is more amazing than human love is the love that God has for us. All of the love that we share between us, all of the love that we share between us is a reflection of God's love for us. All of the risks we've taken, the ways we've put ourselves out there and been vulnerable, taken those chances like Rebekah and Isaac, all of these are reflections of the ways that God has put God's self out there. When writing about love, Frederick Buechner says the following: the first stage of love is to believe that there is only one kind of love. The middle stage is to believe that there are many kinds of love and that the Greeks had a different word for each of them. The last stage of love is to believe that there is only one kind of love. The unabashed eros of lovers, the sympathetic philia of friends, the agape, giving itself away freely, no less for the murderer than for his victim. These are all varied manifestations of a single reality. To lose yourself in another's arms or in another's company or in suffering for all men who suffer, including the ones who inflict suffering upon you. To lose yourself in such ways is to find yourself, is what it's all about, is what love is. Of all powers, love is the most powerful and the most powerless. It is the most powerful because it alone can conquer that final and most impregnable stronghold, which is the human heart. It is the most powerless because it can do nothing except by consent. To say that love is God is romantic idealism. To say God is love is either the last straw or the ultimate truth. I read this quote like twice a week. This quote means more and more to me with each day that I age. It's so spot on. As a child, I really only understood one kind of love. There was one kind of love. And when I got older, I thought there were different kinds of love. Romance and friendship, communal Christian love. And yet, with each day that passes, I am more and more convinced that there is really only one kind of love. Just different expressions of it. All love requires vulnerability and taking a risk and putting ourselves out there authentically and genuinely. Every time I crave another person's company, whether that's a friend or the arms of my husband, I believe in some way I'm seeking the same thing. I am seeking a greater truth that I need somebody, that people need people, that we need each other. No wonder our main story of Isaac is a love story. You can't talk about Isaac without talking about Rebekah, and we cannot talk about God's covenant without talking about relational love. love between people, love between us and God. And out of all of the ways that God could choose to pass the covenant down, this promise that God would be with the people generation after generation, out of all the ways that God could choose to do that, God chose this way, the way of love, the way of family, the way that is relational. God chooses not power, but vulnerability. God chooses not certainty, but risk. This is the God we talk about around campfires, y'all. The one true God. And this God we know. This God is love. Amen.